Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing PlayStation 5 stuff, as well as some Xbox Series X information as well. There has been an awful lot of developments over the past few weeks concerning leaks and potential benchmarks for both consoles. And of course, the PR war officially is heating up as well, with both Sony and Microsoft keen to drum up as much excitement and hype as possible for their respective consoles. After all, both consoles launch in less than a year from now, so it's going to be very curious to see what strategy both companies do employ with the PR war. However, there have been a few interesting developments in terms of the specifications of both consoles. And I want to discuss with you a few developments of what I'm hearing regarding the PlayStation 5 primarily. So, Mark Cerny did confirm a few key details for the PlayStation 5 in a Wired interview, one of which is that the PlayStation 5 would sport a super-fast SSD. He also confirmed that we would see a Zen 2 based CPU and an RDNA based GPU. But of late, there have been several posts from very well-known industry insiders claiming to have insight into the performance metrics of the next-generation consoles, both of them, as well as the specifications as well. Crucially, there's also been an internal testing document that has been floating around the internet. A couple of people actually sent me it, so I have the full internal document and I've been looking through it. I'm very wary of posting screenshots of it because it does actually reveal some details of some personnel, and I don't want to get anyone in trouble, which is one of the reasons that I'm being so selective with the information I'm showing. Unfortunately, obviously, I don't want to get anyone into trouble, and it's also the reason I'm so careful when dealing with any leaks that I'm sent. I obviously want to protect people who send me information or I receive information, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm producing YouTube videos. I don't want to get anyone fired. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. So if someone does email me something anonymously, I want to respect their privacy as much as humanly possible. But with that said, these internal documents are very interesting because they provide some insight into the APUs for both Sony and Microsoft. Unfortunately, the testing for Microsoft is less conclusive. Indeed, it looks like either the testing is not as far as the PlayStation, or potentially it just mostly was in another document that we don't have access to. But with the PlayStation 5 though, there are several interesting things that we can see in the internal documents which seem to prove a lot of the previous leaks is accurate. I am currently working on a much more in-depth comparison between the Xbox and PlayStation 5, and that will be up soon-ish. Honestly, one of the main reasons I'm holding fire right now is because there is a small chance that Sony could officially reveal some details at CES 2019, so I don't want to spend the next couple of days writing the script, or rather finishing the script, it's actually half written, and then publishing it to find out some of these details have either been officially confirmed or completely and utterly inaccurate. Furthermore, though, one of the things I am working on is the ray tracing information that I've been promising, and also some comparisons with Navi, or RDNA if you prefer, and Polaris, so that will be up pretty soon. I'm actually quite far through that script as well. With that said, though, let's take a look at the first piece of information. Okay, well, I think the best place to start with is Pastebin, because there's an alleged leak for the PlayStation 5 specifications, and I've gotten told by a couple of people that this is reported to be current and accurate. I don't know whether it is, but we'll go over the specifications and then go into my thoughts at the very end. I'll go over these fairly quickly and then we can start doing some breakdowns. Zen 2 based processor, 8 cores, 16 threads, no issue with that at all. That is confirmed by Sony, so no issue. 3.2 GHz, I'd be shocked if it wasn't. We've seen the Gonzalo leaks which have pointed to that. We've seen some online benchmarks which point to that. I would be surprised, immensely surprised, if it wasn't 3.2 GHz on the release. Potentially Sony could do a last minute change in clock frequency, but I'm pretty confident that right now 3.2 GHz is accurate. The GPU is a Navi based GPU with 40 compute units running at 2000 and 60 megahertz, which is outputting 10.5 T-flops. There's nothing wrong with the T-flop number if you do the maths on that. 40 times 64 times 2 times 2060, you get roughly 10.5 T-flops, so that does line up quite nicely. It's allegedly targeting 11 T-flops. I'll get more into this in a moment though. 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory at 576 gigabytes per second. That's a lot of gigabytes a second. 3 gigabytes is reserved for the operating system, which of course means 13 gigabytes is allocated to games. The OS reserves, by the way, for your FYI, is almost identical to that of the PS4, if this is accurate. The NVMe SSD is allegedly a 1 terabyte drive, hitting 2.5 gigabytes per second of something. I don't know if that's read, I don't know if that's right. The performance is between the 2070 Super and RTX 2080, which is pretty impressive for a console. Ray tracing performance is between a 2060 and 2070. The boot time is less than 4 seconds, almost no load times. That honestly makes sense. The DS5 has an LCD screen, and the only downside of the dev kit is the noise. I won't read out the second sentence because I don't want Google to be like, no, you are swearing in the video, so we're gonna demonetize you. Now, for those screaming at me, well, what the hell does that mean? And is it accurate? Geez, I can't speak suddenly. Well, I want to go into another leak. This information comes to us via ptt.cc, which is a Chinese forum, and Aquarius Z is actually quite respected. He's given some very accurate leaks in the past. Now, this is where I find things become extremely interesting and things start to tie in rather nicely with several things I'm hearing, as well as some internal documents that I've been sent. I will go into this more in a moment, I promise, but I do want to give you the lay of the land. Kamichi Asata, who is on Twitter, found 4 chip codes, which are Sparkman, Arden, Oberon, and finally Ariel. As you can see, the latter 2 are for the PlayStation, the first 2 are for the Xbox. And what's interesting is that I have gone through the documentation myself, and I am 100% convinced that the Xbox code does mention ray tracing, whereas the PlayStation code doesn't. Sparkman, which is the APU, you can think of Sparkman, by the way, as just the equivalent of saying Lockhart or Xbox Series S, assuming that that's what it's going to be called. They said it's very small, only half the size of Arden, but from a layout point of view, it should be possible that a SoC would have performance of a next generation console. It's just not practical. So it's either streaming or it's going to be kind of a more lower power device. The leaks from Windows Central plus several other locations point to a GPU that's got roughly 4 T-flops of performance. However, I don't want to go into the Xbox side of things super amounts right now. What I want to focus on is Sony. So the next point is that one speculation is Sony have developed its own ray tracing acceleration or found a new supply. Basically, it's customized. If you're not sure what this means, it's that the PlayStation 5's GPU does not mention anything about ray tracing in the code during testing. I've seen it myself, I've trawled through it like 1 trillion times and it's just not listed. It also seems to be using Navi 10 Lite, which unless basically AMD went back to the drawing board and added in ray tracing capabilities to a generation of GPU which doesn't support it natively, it just doesn't make sense for it to be there. But Mark Cerny confirmed that it does have some type of hardware ray tracing. So as I mentioned in a previous video, the options are that A, it is that Sony's lying, which I don't think they would. They have said hardware ray tracing, which means to me it's not running on the shader. Some people say, well, technically it's GPU accelerated because it's running on shaders like compute shaders. I would say that that's stretching the truth so far that I would say it's not genuine. I personally believe that if it's there, from what the information we have thus far, it's possible that the information we have thus far is outdated, or one of the tests did not include ray tracing or something like that. But from what I'm seeing so far, I'm kind of leaning on the fact that there is an additional chip on the APU or outside of the APU which takes care of ray tracing. One of the chips that it could potentially be is for 3D audio, although I'm not certain how that would work because we don't have any patents for 3D audio. We know 3D audio can be a byproduct of ray tracing. I actually discussed this with NVIDIA in an interview. You can search NVIDIA interview on the channel if you want. And basically you can use ray traced audio, but does that mean that the chip itself can perform ray tracing? Can it do the BVH and calculate intersection of rays? I've no idea. So I'm not saying that that's true. I'm just going by this information. The only other custom chip that we know of right now is the 3D audio processor. Apparently Arden is larger. I've heard this from multiple people. I'm hearing that the PlayStation chip is in the low 300mm. I keep being told different sizes. I've told it was 300mm, and I've been told it's 330mm, excuse me. But I don't have an exact size because everyone tells me different sizes. And I'm just being honest here. I'm not going to say it's one thing when I've been told multiple different things because it would be very dishonest of me. As for the Xbox, I did a quick calculation myself for the E3 video. We of course saw photos of it. Although whether that's actually the working silicon or not, I don't know. I don't know. But it looked like it was around 350, 360 mm in size. And I've heard from multiple people that Arden, which is once again Xbox Series X, is around 350 to 370. So I guess that kind of makes sense in terms of a bit larger. Okay, so let's have a look at the specifications. I've discussed the CPU side of the equation in this video briefly, but honestly there's not much I can add to it. So for 40 compute units running at 2060 MHz, that's really fast. So here's what I know based upon the internal documents that I've seen. Basically, it has 36 compute units running at 2000 MHz, and then it has fewer compute units running at a lower clock frequency for backwards compatibility. So, for example, it will have 800 MHz for the PS4 emulation. PS4 Pro, meanwhile, has 911 MHz. The memory is very similar, actually. From what I'm reading, it's got 448 GB per second in native mode. In other words, playing a PS5 game. But if it's running a PS4 game, depending on whether it's emulating PS4 Pro or PS4, the memory bandwidth will reduce to either 176 GB per second or 218. Once again, PS4, PS4 Pro, respectively. I can also presume that the CPU side of the equation will also change as well, like SMT will go bye-bye, clock frequencies will diminish, and blah-de-blah-de-blah-blah. Performance between a 2070 Super and a 2080, yeah, I could see that based upon even 36 compute units, which is what the internal documentation is saying. Now here's the other thing. If you look at a result from Tim Apisak, he found a Firestrike result for what he believes is the PlayStation 5. According to him, it scores 20,000 points in Firestrike, whereas the PS4 vanilla console, the base console, scores 5,000 points. So the reason I find this so interesting is because it's roughly 4 times as fast. And you have to remember that that was kind of an earlier engineering sample processor, and also for software which is essentially a PC benchmark. In other words, it's about as unoptimized as you can get for the PS5 hardware. It's just like, does this explode when we run it on there, and what type of performance are we getting? And it kind of makes sense because the internal benchmarks I'm seeing in terms of like fill rates and stuff do look about a little bit faster than twice the performance of the PS4 Pro. So does that mean that the PS5 is, roughly speaking, these specifications? Does that mean that Microsoft have the performance advantage? Well, it's very difficult to know. as I mentioned in the other video, there is definitely one area the PlayStation has a major advantage in, and that is that the clock frequency of the GPU is faster, which could mean some tasks run faster despite the absence of compute units. Potentially we could see higher pixel fill rates or something like that. Unfortunately, a lot of the internal documentation for the Xbox GPUs is missing in what I have. So it makes it a lot harder to know. I do know, though, that the Xbox has higher memory bandwidth, because here's the thing, the RAM here is listed as 576 gigabytes per second. That would mean that we have 18 Gbps modules. In the documentation I've seen, it's 448 gigabytes per second, although several people have told me that that's old, and indeed in one test I've seen it was 512, and a couple of other people have told me it is now 512 gigabytes per second for the PlayStation 5. As for the NVMe SSD, yeah, I would like to know more about whether it's read or write speeds and so on and so on. As always, I would caution you to take a truckload of salt with any console leak until the systems officially launch. The fact of the matter is as well that specifications can change near the last minute. There are some things which would be a lot harder to change, like for example, adding a whole bunch of additional compute units to either console would be rather difficult. It's not like you can just slot in a discrete GPU like you can, let's say, with a PC. But other things like clock frequencies, provided you've got enough cooling headroom where they feel that they'd be okay in terms of yields, that can change. Memory clock speeds, that can change, and so on and so on. Indeed, they could even decide, hey, we want to go with a larger SSD, just for the sake of argument. So it's going to be fascinating to see exactly what shape both consoles end up in when they launch. I also wouldn't be surprised if the next generation Xbox does launch with two different SKUs, and Microsoft with the Xbox Series X is around $100 more expensive than the PlayStation 5, but trying to combat this as much as humanly possible with the lower end Xbox, which I'm just going to call the Xbox Series S. Either way, I hope that you will join me in the adventure for the next 12 months. And honestly, performance metrics aside, and which one has a slightly sparklier resolution, I'm actually just really looking forward to seeing what the next generation consoles bring to gaming, period. Particularly when it comes to things such as improved AI, which honestly I've been wanting for games for some time now if you've been a follower of the channel, and it will also not be terrible to not deal with like 5-minute loading screens. That is definitely going to be a bonus. With all of that said though, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then of course you can subscribe for much more content and give the video a like or a share or what have you, because that helps us out a ton, because after all, YouTube is YouTube. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.